Communications in World War II by Russo and Owen. During World War II, many types of communications methods were utilized. During this period, new types of radios and receivers were invented to make communicating faster, easier, and more reliable.
During the war, new types of methods of communications were needed. Because of the new teams of infantry, artillery, armored, and airborne divisions, radios were produced fast and distributed to platoons at the regimental level. Every tank had at least one radio, and in some command tanks, as many as 3 radios. The Germans started utilizing multi-conductor cables, which were wired communications that could be laid out and provided communications from ranges over 100 miles. A major advancement was high-power switchboards, which were put in place at many headquarters and could handle all the necessary communications. New long-range electronic navigation devices were created during the later years of the war. Landing aircraft in zero visibility was perfected with the invention of GCA, the Ground Controlled Approach System. In general, many new methods of communication were developed out of the necessity during the war.
One of these radios changed the world forever. The SCR 536 Handy Talkie, produced by Galvin Manufacturing, was one of the first handheld portable radios. It had a range of over 1 mile over land and 3 miles over salt water, but anything from atmospheric conditions to landforms to dirt and water in the battery could significantly decrease this range. Over 130,000 of them were made, mostly for communicating to platoon leaders, a short distance job. The troops enjoyed having them, as they said it was like having a household phone at the tips of your hands. It made them feel safer, stronger, and better, knowing they could always be in touch with their command post. The SCR 536 had some major flaws though. The radio only had one channel, which meant it couldn't be switched between channels to talk to different people. Another major flaw was the 40-inch antenna the radio had. For clearer communication, the radio had to be held upright, therefore meaning the antenna was right in view of enemy positions. This antenna became a target for sharpshooters once they figured out that it meant troops nearby. Galvin Manufacturing, the company that made the SCR 536, went on to make civilian radios after that. They later became Motorola, the wildly successful radio company that even helped pioneer the modern-day mobile phone. They now make some of the most common police and fire radios, as well as even toy walkie-talkies. Overall, the SCR 536 had a lasting impact as to how modern-day communications exist.
Both sides during the war had coded communications, but none as great as the Marines' Navajo Cold Talkers. The Navajo Cold Talkers were the Navajo Indians hired by America to talk in coded forms of their native language. Nearly 400 Navajo Cold Talkers were hired, and their language was not widely known, therefore making it an excellent form of coded communication. The Marines who had the job of deciphering it had to be trained and learned hundreds of coded words to understand what the code meant. Out of all the coded communications used during World War II, the Navajo Cold Talkers' language was never deciphered by the enemy, therefore proving its effectiveness to provide safe and secure communications without ever giving up information to the enemy. On the home front, communications were also playing a major role in the war. One form, known as propaganda, was used for this reason plus others. Propaganda were posters in windows that appealed to the public's eye about the war and were usually positive and aimed at emotions. Propaganda aimed at people at home, such as women, calling them to go to work at the factories producing munitions and planes while their husbands were off fighting the war. Other times it was used to recruit soldiers to the army to actually fight in the war. Propaganda was also used to make the enemies feel bad about themselves. These rude and almost always false messages were dropped in leaflets meant to shake the enemy's morale and confuse them so that they would be more prone to surrender and join the other side, or just to demoralize them. More often than not, propaganda was false, often hiding the honors of the war behind brightly colored and happy posters and leaflets, manipulating people into thinking propaganda wasn't a thing and it was that their country had no such propaganda. Another way the public communicated was through President Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats. These were radio broadcasts roughly twice a year directly to the public. Roosevelt felt that it was good to speak directly to the public in a live, unfiltered broadcast. The fireside chats were then scheduled for every 3 months to keep the public updated on the status of the war. These chats brought great comfort and stability to the public during the times of crisis such as World War II or the Great Depression. Another more frequent way the public was updated was newspapers. The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, gave a speech directly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, alerting the public to what happened Here is part of that broadcast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you tonight at a very serious moment in our history. The Cabinet is convening and the leaders in Congress are meeting with the President. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the President all afternoon. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking to the President at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and the Philippines and sinking one of our transports loaded with lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be ready for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action.
Between ships, there were many techniques used to communicate safely and effectively. One of these onboard methods was speaking tubes. These were pipes all throughout the ship in which one person would speak from one end of the tube, and the sound would travel through the tube to another part of the ship. These have been around since the 19th century. You can even find them in playgrounds and parks today. PA systems were also used to communicate messages to everyone on the ship, so you can hear it no matter where you were. Between ships, they would use flashing lights to communicate Morse code, and they would also use special colored flags. An interesting way that planes could communicate to ships was by dropping a beanbag on the deck. This method dates back to the Doolittle raids on Japan in 1942. These beanbags became great for when radios were jammed by the enemy or if they went down. This technique was also used during MCON, emissions control procedures, or when the ship went radio silent in order to not be detected as easily by limiting electromagnetic signatures. The USS Boxer has recently been testing with beanbags to see if they can bring back the USS Boxer has recently been testing with beanbags to see if they can bring back the beanbag technique as part of a practical tool for communications on board modern-day vessels.
In World War II, the German Enigma machine was used for communicating. The Germans used this method of communication because it was believed to be unreadable by anyone other than the Germans. They used it to communicate battle plans and war tactics. The Enigma machine has an electromechanical rotor system that scrambles all 26 letters of the alphabet. While Germany introduced a series of improvements to Enigma over the years, all of these hampered decryption efforts to varying degrees. They did not ultimately prevent Britain and its allies from exploiting Enigma-coded messages as a major source of intelligence during the war. Alan Turing, a Cambridge University mathematician and logician, provided much of the original thinking that led to the design of the bomb machine that were instrumental in eventually breaking the naval Enigma.
On planes, there were many radio units, each with a different function. Liaison radio was used by the radio men for plane-to-ground communications. Command radio was used for plane-to-plane communications, and compass radio was used by the navigator to fix the plane's position via triangulation of two or more known ground-based stations. Beacon radio was a simple unit designed for landing in conditions such as fog. The interphone system was a system on bombers that linked all of the crew members together with a headset and a microphone. A typical set included one amplifier unit and 10 jack boxes, each one at the crew member's position in the plane. Each jack box had the capability to select either the liaison, command, or compass radio, as well as call other crew members.